Got it. Looks like we're live.
Yeah.
Do you have a Do you have a Google Pixel also phone?
Yeah, I love that phone.
Yeah, I like mine too. Have you noticed when you go places, it starts pushing like local news to you?
I think I turned that off with I just got I got the six I had the three for a super long time.
Okay.
And so I just got the six and I think I turned that off, but I will get like recommendations for places to go or check out and stuff like that.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I have the five, but I don't, since getting to Nashville, like I keep getting all this local news, like more than even at home. So I don't
Hmm.
know what's up. Um, oh, Donna, we're glad you made it a live session as well. So we've been a little bit kind of all over the place ourselves, so it's not been easy for people to plan. We're
Yeah,
trying to do it on Mondays, but I don't know about Ben, but I'm usually exhausted on Mondays, especially
it's
this
true.
Monday.
It's true. We might have to reevaluate at some point.
No, it's a good day. Good way to start off the weekdays of the week.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh,
Well, I guess we can go ahead and get ourselves rolling every single time we're super running out of time, even more than
yeah,
usual.
yeah,
Hebrews 11. So the last couple of chats we've had, we've been looking at Hebrews 11, talking about the kind of faith that pleases God, the faith that's necessary to please God, the faith without which is impossible to please God. Um, and today we're going to talk about Abraham and however many members of his family we can get to. We'll see. We may just talk about him alone, but we're going to pick up in verse 8 and read through verse 22. What else do you think we need to say before we set up the reading today?
yeah. Just the fact that God decided to tell these stories to us, or remind us of the stories He already told, but with this focus on like how they gained approval from God, and like it's kind of interesting to think about like what He doesn't say about them. Like, why does He choose the things He chooses? Because you could say a lot more about these guys' lives, including their failures.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know. It's just going to be fun to talk about like why did He choose what He chose, um, to remind us of.
Yeah, that'll especially pop up. Some of these other characters, we almost get more information about them in Hebrews 11 than even what the book of Genesis tells us, or we get additional information. But with Abraham starting, we're really, to your point, he's selective. So with that, let's go ahead and read. We'll read verses 8 through 22, Hebrews 11. And I'm reading from the CSB. By faith, Abraham, when he was called, obeyed and set out for a place that he was going to receive as an inheritance. He went out even though he did not know where he was going. By faith, he stayed as a foreigner in the land of promise, living in tents, as did Isaac and Jacob, co heirs of the same promise. For he was looking forward to the city that has foundations, whose architect and builder is God. By faith, even Sarah herself, when she was unable to have children, received power to conceive offspring, even though she was past the age, since she considered that the one who had promised was faithful. Therefore, from one man, in fact, from one as good as dead, came offspring as numerous as the stars of the sky and as innumerable as the grains of sand along the seashore. These all died in faith, although they had not received the things that were promised, but they saw them from a distance, greeted them, and confessed that they were foreigners and temporary residents on the earth. Now, those who say such things make it clear that they are seeking a homeland. If they were thinking about where they came from, they would have had opportunity to return, but they now desire a better place, a heavenly one. Therefore, God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he has prepared a city for them. By faith, Abraham, when he was tested, offered up Isaac. He received the promises, and yet he was offering his one and only son, the one to whom it had been said, your offspring will be called through Isaac. He considered God to be able even to raise someone from the dead. Therefore, he received him back, figuratively speaking. By faith, Isaac blessed Jacob and Esau concerning things to come. By faith, Jacob, when he was dying, blessed each of the sons of Joseph, and he worshiped leaning on the top of his staff. By faith, Joseph, as he was nearing the end of his life, mentioned the exodus of the Israelites and gave instructions concerning his bones.
Amen. So that gets us through Genesis, right? I mean, those are the Genesis characters of people who walked by faith. You know, one thing that actually jumped out while you were reading that I maybe hadn't been conscious of before is I think when I read these passages, I'm so focused on the characters of the people, like the people that are being talked about by faith, Abraham, by faith, Sarah, by faith, the people. I've missed how many times God's talked about in this.
Yeah.
Like he was the one who called, he was the one who promised,
Yeah.
he was the one who gave ability, he was the one who, did the things that are what the people trusted in. And it kind of occurs to me, isn't that really what this is about? Is not, I think with faith, sometimes I think, man, do I really have the ability to have this kind of faith? Do I really have the ability to do this next thing in my life? And maybe what set these people apart is they weren't thinking so much about their ability. They kept focusing on God's ability.
Yeah.
God was the one that was able to do this. I think even when we got down there to verse 19, God was able to raise people from the dead. This is all about whether or not God's trustworthy, not whether or not I trust him. But I guess there's a little bit to talk about with that. Any decision that we make in our life where we're having to weigh the evidence and figure out if our next step is a trustworthy step, is this going to be good? We've got to find the courage in ourselves to move forward. But where that comes from is having, again, a worthy object of whether or not we're going to put our trust in the one that we're trusting in. So anyway, that just jumped out at me while you were reading. So
yeah, and it's pretty cool to see this explicitly mentioned in two different ways. In verse 11, like with the Isaac being kind of the linchpin of, or the connector of Abraham and Sarah's faith, or the issue they had to have faith about. In verse 11, to your point, what was it that made Sarah able to conceive? It says she considered that the one who had promised was faithful. And then to your point, after Isaac was alive for a little while, verse 19, Abraham considered that God would be able to raise Isaac from the dead. To me, this is just a good reminder, and this is just kind of extending your point, really. But the key to pleasing God, the key to overcoming, the key to enduring, the key to salvation is not necessarily the strength or the value or the quality of my faith. I have to have faith, but it may still be kind of weak and kind of growing and kind of not all that I know it should be. Mm-hmm. But it's the degree to which the value or quality of the object in which I'm trusting, which is God. And I think that's a really encouraging thing, because we mentioned this earlier. A lot of these characters, starting really with Abraham and Sarah especially, there's some pretty dark, bad, twisted stuff when you really start actually thinking about the stuff that they did throughout their life and ways that they were actively not faithful at certain episodes and periods, even some of the ones that get mentioned here. But at the end of the day, they were still trusting in God. They were still going where he told them to go. They were still relying on him, even though they were pretty messed up in a lot of ways. And sometimes we can maybe paper over the ways they were messed up, or we can exaggerate how bad they were. But I like what Hebrews 11 does, which brings us back to, their story. They did all this pretty rotten stuff in some cases. But at the end of the day, they still were trusting in God, or trying their best to. And that's what got them through. And that's what made them pleasing to God.
Yeah, good. And, I think as I try to live my life for the Lord, I've gone through some things like trying to figure out, like, all right, see if I can figure out how to say this. When I think about heaven being our goal, there's been these times in my life where I'm like, man, I'm not even really sure exactly what that place is going to be like. Like, I know the Bible describes it, but I think the Bible is describing a place that we can't even really wrap our minds around in terms with, streets of gold, pearly gates, like all these different things. And and then you start thinking about it and you're like, am I really going to even like a place like that? It sounds a little cold. Like, I don't know.
Awkward. I always feel awkward. Anytime I had to go into a store, I'm like, please get me out of here. This is not
right.
I don't belong here.
But when you get, so I guess where I'm coming from with this is in verse 8, when we're told that Abraham obeyed by going to a place that he was going to receive as an inheritance that he'd never seen. And I don't even know that God described it to him. Did he say, like, hey, I'm going to give you a place that's flowing with milk and honey, a land flowing with milk and honey, like he would tell the Israelites on their way to the promised land. Maybe he told him that. But where Abraham was called from wasn't like a shabby place.
Right.
You know, Ur of the Chaldees like was the place at that time in history, as far as I understand. You know, I've read that they've uncovered that probably during Abraham's time, they had like split level homes that were air conditioned and stuff like that. They'd figured out how to pipe water through them to like cool them down. And they had schools where like, you know, logarithms and high math were being taught, like extensive libraries that they've uncovered that people could like. This wasn't like being asked to leave some podunk town. And it wasn't like he was even being told to go someplace that he completely understood.
Yeah.
So there's two things about his call. Like it says in verse 8, he's going to receive this place as an inheritance, but it says he went out not knowing where he was going. Like, I don't even know where this place is. I don't even know how I'm going to get there. How many of us, like, we struggle with moving forward with our walk with God because those two things trouble us. I don't really know exactly what is coming, even though I'm trying to wrap my mind around a place God's described. And I don't know how I'm going to get there. I can't trace the path, which implies, doesn't it, that that's not what it's about. It's not me understanding or trying to even teach people, hey, here's going to be the path that's going to get you there. And here's exactly what it's going to be like. Here's the payoff. It's more about teaching people about the God who made those promises. God's the one who's going to give us what he promised. God's the one who's going to get us there. And what you need to put your trust in is not the path or even like understanding the place, but the person who's going to do those things. And I know that's maybe nuanced or subtle, but I've wrestled with that in my life.
And so, yeah, that's great. This whole thing of the place, that was probably the thing to me that popped out of the text. This is maybe just a little bit broader on your point here, but the issue of place is such a big point of emphasis in this section. So, I mean, the place is mentioned in verse 8. And I know maybe with whatchamacallit, Sarah, it's more about the child that she would bear. But in verse 13, 14, 15, 16, again, it comes back to the place issue that they left the place where they were to find a better place. And then in verse 20, what was the stuff that Isaac blessed Jacob and Esau about? We know it was ultimately about their possession and where they would be and what they would have. Joseph, the last one mentioned of Abraham's family before the family became a nation, Joseph's stuff was about taking his bones back to their place. So there's so much emphasis on finding a place and having a place. But there's also an interesting contrast where in verse 9 and then again in verse 13, there's this emphasis on the people who are going to receive a place from God. Our people are going to have to be really comfortable with the notion that you're not going to belong until God brings you to that place. And I mean, there's a tangible reality that these people experience and that we all will whenever we come to be with the Lord in the resurrection. But I think that's also a really great kind of symbolic thing. All human beings are looking for a place to belong. I mean, how important is real estate prices? That's what all anybody talks about in any place, especially now, any area. It's all about how much it costs, which indicates people want a place to belong. People care about where they are and where their home is and all that stuff. One of the challenges of faith is never really thinking of any place on earth as your place, the place where you belong.
Yeah.
I'm still on a journey. I'm a stranger and a foreigner, a temporary resident until God brings me to himself, to the place where I belong. That takes a lot of faith. And the challenge for us is to want to build up our own place. I think that actually fits in the slightly broader context of Abraham's story, because in the book of Genesis, before God says, I'll make your name great, I'll make you a great nation, humanity in Genesis 11 had said, let's make ourselves a place, Babel. Let's build a tower. We'll make our name great. That's the temptation, is to want to secure ourselves and make ourselves okay. But Abraham and his family that followed in his footsteps teach us faith means you got to be comfortable not having a place here and following wherever God leads in your life to be with him.
Yeah, so well said. Just while I'm thinking about that, here where I'm at in Nashville right now for this meeting, I've never been with this group. It's the church at Broadmoor. Um, seems like an amazing group of Christians here. Um, they support some preacher, I guess, in Moldova. And so he's right there in Eastern Europe conflict. And I guess he's coming here this week, like bringing his family
Wow.
because they had to leave. And you think about people, Christians that live in places where it's always been their home. They built their home, they made their life there. And then they look up one day and here comes tanks and here comes like a change. And you essentially just have to stand up and walk away, like the heartache in that. But is there a different thing that happens with a Christian who doesn't have that same kind of affection for the location of their life or the country that they live in? How much trouble have we seen, I think, among Christians here in this country over the last couple of decades about how our country seems to be changing in people's opinions and the threat to our way of life, like many of Americans begin to think. And I think some of this text needs to help us shape our thinking about that. When Abraham left Ur, do you think he was still like worrying about the politics of Ur? Like, was he like constantly sending back from the Oaks of Mamre, like, can I get like the newest publication of like the newspaper to figure out like what's happening with the local government, what's happening with the leaders? Like, maybe there's a proper place for concern. God's always told his people, be a blessing to the place you live, seek the welfare of the cities you're in. But man, there's got to be a way to do that and not hold affection for those places in the same way as what we're looking forward to. Go ahead.
Oh, I was say, I think this temporary resident foreigner stuff, like when I've visited other countries, I've cared and I've been interested in what's going on in Colombia. Tell me about the politics of this place. Or whenever I visited Sierra Leone or visited Zimbabwe or whatever, I'm always interested in that because I'm interested in how it impacts people. But I'm not up at night thinking about, and I'm not scheming how to impact Colombian politics or friends in other parts of the world, right? And I think that's the way we should, as Christians. And again, like you said, maybe there's even a little more responsibility or opportunity we may have in the places that the world counts us as citizens, but I should never really count myself as a citizen. If I have an opportunity to do something that would actually help, sure, great. But I'm a temporary resident. I'm a foreigner. I'm a stranger. I'm a pilgrim. I'm an alien. And if we think like that, we'd be able to probably actually do a lot more good in the world because we'd be working with God instead of trying to work with the powers of this world. More importantly, or maybe more fundamentally, our faith wouldn't be in what happens in this place, but our faith will be in God who goes with us wherever we may go.
Right in the middle of kind of listing Abraham and Sarah's faith moments, there's this parenthetical in verses 13 through 16 that I think is really valuable, where like right in the middle of this chapter, he's like, all right, all these that I'm talking about, they died in faith without receiving the promises. And then he kind of like lists, what does a faithful person really look like? What makes these people all the same? Well, they see something in the distance, which we've already sort of made clear. They couldn't even really see it that clearly, like it was a promise to them, but they couldn't tangibly, if you'd say like, hey, Abraham, sketch out what the promised land looked like, the promise looks like, what's there. Like he didn't even know where he was going. But they welcomed it from a distance, it says. And they made this confession, like the way they spoke about their lives is that they were strangers and exiles on the earth. And even goes for in verse 15, he says, if they'd been thinking of that country, they would have had opportunity to return. Now, I know this is not an easy conversation, and it sometimes sounds like what I'm saying is don't care about your country, don't care about your community. And that's not what I'm saying. And that's not what this is saying. But I do think that this section of Hebrews is going to inform us on, well, what's our responsibility as living as exiles in this world? He's going to get to chapter 13 and he's going to say, like, you keep being hospitable. You keep being hospitable to the people around you. Abraham was like that. As soon as he got to where he was going, he starts welcoming even angels. He takes care of people in the region where these kings come and attack Lot and others. And there was ways to sort of see how these guys operated as temporary citizens,
Yeah.
or exiles here, or wanderers, but still caring about the people around them. And I think there's just a lot to think about that.
Yeah. 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 And in general, it's this understanding that God isn't coupled really to a place. This has a lot of similarities actually to Stephen's sermon in Acts chapter 7, where in Acts chapter 7, it details a lot of these same stories. And one of the primary points that Stephen is making is, hey, you guys in Jerusalem, y'all think God is some way coupled to this location, and y'all need to preserve this location and all this kind of thing. But God was with Abraham and Joe, and while he was wandering, he was with Joseph when he was in prison in Egypt. He was with the Israelites all throughout. This temple building, this is not it. All the earth belongs to God. And really the key is, do you trust in God? Do you find your security and your safety and your preservation in God? This really ties back to what we talked about. We've talked about almost every time here lately in the book of Habakkuk. God's basically telling Habakkuk, hey, things are going to go wrong in your place. But the righteous one who trusts in me, who is loyal to me, he'll be preserved. He'll keep on going. And so you don't have to worry about it too much. And Abraham and Sarah and their family really model that as complicated and as problematic they were and sinful as they were at times, they ultimately knew, hey, we're not anchoring down anywhere. We're anchoring down in the Lord.
Yeah. Yeah. That's good. In verse 9, when it says that he lived as an alien in the land of promise, as in a foreign land, and then this phrase, dwelling in tents with Isaac and Jacob. I've wondered about this. Does that sort of imply that Abraham was still alive when Jacob was born? Were they actually, was he still alive? I think maybe the math works out on that a little bit. But more importantly, is that all three of these patriarchs never really put down roots here. They only put down tent pegs. They did not build these structures. They were, and I'll tell you, out of the three of those, I feel like Isaac, being the middle child, had kind of the most difficult of circumstances. I mean, Abraham's the guy that got called. Jacob's the guy that gets the kids, that sees it all unfold. Isaac's the middleman who's sort of guess my whole life's just here, between dad and son,
hoping my dad doesn't kill me and my son won't cheat me again.
Right. I don't think Isaac gets enough credit for being a pretty amazing, faithful man, who was kind of the middle person. And there's ways to maybe talk about this in practical ways. I think Christianity can go through periods of time in any given place where there's lots of great movement and growth. You and I are a product of what's happened in the United States of America with the Restoration Movement, and you look at the history of all the exciting stuff that was going on, and maybe there's going to be something after us where there'll be another renewal, or big changes for churches in America. Are we the middle children who are kind of where are the days where the tent meetings were going on and evangelism was exploding, and who knows? It's not like God made specific promises about churches in America, but a lot of times we can feel a little bit like the middle child of Christianity, or if we're second generation or third generation Christians, and we haven't fought the battles that our parents fought or our grandparents fought. Anyway, I would just say Isaac might be somebody for us to think about.
Yeah, nothing cool that happens, but you just keep on being faithful, and something good comes out of it.
Mm-hmm.
One thing that is sort of tangential to that, but one thing I was thinking about in this is, so Abraham and Sarah obey God as they go out. They're faithful, meaning they do what God tells them to do, and they go out and they keep going out. They never turn back. Verse 15 verse 15. Well, what is that? And that's is set up as a call for us. We need to just keep on obeying God, whatever he tells us to do, even when it doesn't make sense, even when it's very different from what we maybe would have thought or preferred or whatever. You go and do whatever God tells you. Go forgive that person. Go talk to that person about the gospel. Go serve that person who's in need. Go pray for that person, whatever it is. Go do it, just like Abraham did. But one lesson I get from Abraham and Sarah's story is that whenever you go out and obey the Lord, there's two things that'll happen inevitably. I'm sure there's definitely more than two, but at least two. One is really amazing, good things will happen. Sarah receives the power to conceive. That's an incredible thing. In her age, and they named him Laughter, which had multiple layers of meaning, but one would be just the joy and the excitement. This is incredible. Look at this. I mean, you just laugh about it because it's phenomenal. Okay, but then the next thing about Isaac is that Abraham is commanded by God to sacrifice him, and Abraham does it. I mean, that's the way it says. He did it in his heart. It was done. I mean, he had not actually taken Isaac's life, and of course, God stopped him from it and said, "Hey, I was just seeing your love for me and all that kind of thing." But I guess the point being that whenever you go out and obey God in faith, sometimes amazing, wonderful things that make you laugh and have joy will happen, but also sometimes really insanely painful, challenging, the last thing you'd ever want to do. That's going to happen too.
Yeah.
And we've got to embrace both of those and expect both of those, not like look for them or hunt them down, but whenever they come up, just keep on being faithful. Whenever we reach those joyous moments, that doesn't stop us. We're not done. Like, oh, great, the good thing happened, and now I don't need to keep. No, you keep on going.
Yeah.
And whenever the really hard things come up of living a faithful life, you keep on going. You don't stop and say, no, I can't go any further, God, I can't do this. Both of those can be stopping points. All the good things happen. There's nothing more for me to do. No, there is. Keep on going, keep obeying, keep going out. Oh, the hard thing that makes me stop. No, you got to keep on going, keep obeying, keep going out. And that's a challenge to me, seeing that in their story here.
Yeah, that's so good. Really well said. I think Katie was asked a question earlier about like Jacob in this, and she said like, the Jacob thing in verse 21 is a little bit confusing. You kind of get like Abraham did this in faith. Here's Sarah, here's all that. But what about Jacob? Like, why mention Jacob as he was dying, blessed each of the sons of Joseph, worshiped, leaning on the top of his staff? Couple thoughts I have, and I'm curious what you think about this. And this kind of relates to what you were saying. I feel like when I read Genesis, it took Jacob a while to get to a place of faith in God.
Yeah.
He kept calling God the God of his fathers, the God of my fathers, the God of my fathers. He almost kind of gave God ultimatums of like, hey, if you really take care of me, then you'll be my God. And, almost like somebody who really wrestled. That's a good word for him, right? Because his name was changed to wrestles with God. But maybe the point of verse 21 is, here's Jacob at the end of his life, and what's he doing? He's worshiping this God who's been faithful as he's dying. And where is he? He's in the land of Egypt, blessing the sons of Joseph. He's not even over there where God promised. Right. He's not even there, and yet he's still worshiping God. So can somebody who took a long time in their life to actually really come to faith in God, and then, as you mentioned earlier, go through incredibly challenging thing with their children, with their own mistakes, like with some of the things that have come back to haunt them from their earlier life. And even when they're old, how many people have you known that when they got older, they had to basically leave their home? Their kids live somewhere else. I know a lot of people like this, and they need to be where somebody can take care of them. They go somewhere else, and everything that they knew is gone. And here's Jacob in Egypt, can't even stand up. He's leaning on his staff or the bed, or however you want to read that.
Right.
What's he doing? He's worshiping the God that's been faithful to him through all of that. And that's a beautiful picture.
Yeah. And I think a thing maybe to slightly add to that is, as he's worshiping God and blessing his sons, the blessings aren't just these, when you go back and read them at the end of Genesis, they aren't like vague blessings.
Right.
All of them aren't, but they're actually blessings that are directly attached to, hey, God said whatever, God's going to do whatever. And so even though he had such a troubled life of faith, which a lot of it, like you said, is, I mean, even he basically says, I don't trust you, God, not yet, at least. You got to prove it to me kind of stuff. I
Mhm.
mean, that's my little, version of it. That's pretty much what he says. But at the end of his life, he didn't see the promise come true. Like the passage said, these died in faith without having seen the promises. He believed they're a reality. Whenever you're back, not if you get back or if you end up somewhere else, it's God's going to come through. And I think that's the beauty of Jacob's stories. That's where he ended up, was he was confident that God's word was true and he was sticking with that, whatever else had happened along the way.
Yeah. We're almost out of time. And
Yeah,
I know we haven't covered all of this in great detail, but Joseph is mentioned in verse 22. And it kind of occurs to me that out of everybody on this list, Joseph might have been the one who would have been most tempted to like feel at home where he was. How great had Joseph become? You
yes,
know, like especially after being rejected by his own family and finally having a place of power and wealth. I mean, Joseph essentially was one of the most powerful people in Egypt. And can somebody like that still have their priorities straight?
Mm,
Can somebody like that still know where their real home is?
yeah,
And even when he wrestled, I think, with forgiving his brothers and feeling like a part of this family, one of the last thing he does at the end is he's like, hey, this isn't my home.
yeah,
Take my bones with you when you go to the promised land, because I know where I really belong. And so I think in this story, you've got people of very different situations. Isaac, who just lived in tents in this place all his life, like that was his life. Joseph, who became rich and powerful and looked up to in a place. The thing again that ties these people together is they knew where their home really was, like who their people really were.
yeah,
Uh, I, I also have to say this phrase here that God's not ashamed to call them their God because he's prepared a city for them. It's kind of interesting having this internet like group of people. It's going to be so cool one day when we all live in the same city,
yeah.
like when we all are where we really belong. Like
Mhm.
it's what draws us together now, but like looking forward to that kind of thing is just really cool.
Yeah, amen. Amen. And whenever we struggle with wondering, am I going to get there? Am I being faithful like I ought or whatever? This point you're making about Joseph, I think is so crucial because if, and I don't mean any disrespect by saying it, if I were to have written Hebrews 11, there's no way of all the things in Joseph's life, I would have never listed, if it was like, you get to put one thing about Joseph, I would
Yeah,
have never picked this one thing ever.
right.
It would have been, there's at least, I don't know, 8 things, maybe 9 or 10 things that you would put, I would put before this.
Yeah,
But I think this is really cool because ultimately, the big thing that God noticed wasn't the big things that I noticed, the dramatic things,
right.
these like critical junctures of his life kinds of things. Those are
Yeah,
important. I'm not trying to downplay that. Uh, but the thing that God noticed was he always had his eyes set on what I told him and where I was going to bring him.
yeah,
That's what really makes me unashamed to be called his God. And that's really encouraging to me. It's not the big dramatic things.
right.
And when I may feel like I'm not doing any big dramatic things or I'm not doing anything significant, or I feel like my days a lot of times are just kind of accomplishing nothing in terms of my faith or for the Lord or whatever. If I just keep on consistently, quietly doing the things that God tells me, knowing what he's promised is true, he's pleased with that.
And Joseph saying that about his bones being taken somewhere else was so countercultural. I mean, everything about Egypt for the important people was, I need a monument in my name for
Yeah.
everybody to remember my legacy. And Joseph's just like, get me out of here. And we've got to be people who are countercultural in all those kinds of ways that people clamor for the attention. You were talking about Babel earlier and how we want to make a name for ourselves versus there's so much good stuff in this, and we're totally over time. So
We got to stop.
I'm going to pull
Yeah.
the plug. All right.
This was fun. Thanks everybody. Thanks as always. Thanks for the good comments and just interacting and being able to meet. I got to make another friend last week when I was in Texas. I know this happens from time to time where we meet people from that have joined us on here. So it's really cool. So thanks to everybody, and we'll Lord willing, see you next week.